Well. Clemson Tiger fans, college football fans, welcome back to another episode of the All In Show right here on the Voice of College Football Clemson channel. I am, as always, your host, Tiger Paul Craven. Thank you so much for joining me. Jordan will be joining us momentarily. Got a couple things to talk about on tonight's show. Not a ton in the news cycle. But a couple spring games are in the books for a few of Clemson's big opponents on their schedule. We'll talk about that tonight. We'll talk about the transfer portal a little bit. And then, as always, we will finish up the show with your comments and let you guys kind of drive the last bit of the show with your questions and what you guys want to talk about. So, with all of that said, and without further ado, if you are not subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Also, hit that like button, and then the super chat feature is always available to you guys. If you like what me and Jordan do here on the Voice of College Football, and more specifically the All In Show, go ahead and hit that super chat feature. Come support us. Let's go ahead and kick off the show tonight. Bring on my buddy Jordan Bowman. How you doing tonight, man?
I'm doing well. Just kind of we're back in that mode where it's now there's no more football to talk about. Spring is over and all
That's
that.
Right.
Just kind of settled in fully to the off season now. This is where it's like, now it's like only thing to pay attention to is recruiting and the transfer portal, and that's about it. But I did get a chance to tune into a couple of spring games last weekend, and then kind of, for some of Clemson's opponents this season, and then kind of get an idea of what, their roster construction is looking like. Because, again, you can't take too much from spring games, but they can be constructive as far as, like, who are the guys that they're expected to rely on, and who are the guys that they're really who is Clemson going to see when the two teams lined it up in the fall? It was pretty constructive in that aspect. So excited to talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely, man. It's one of those times of year, right? Like we just kind of put the bow on spring, and the spring game's over, and there's not a ton going on as far as football news. Obviously, the transfer portal is officially open, has been for about 4 days now. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the show, but, it's a slower cycle for the world of college football right now. But, make no mistake about it, it will start heating up here in short order. Obviously, you think about recruiting, the big recruiting weekend at the end of May. That's going to be huge for Clemson. That's going to be huge for the 2025 class. And so we'll have plenty to talk about as we go along. But sorry, the show is late tonight for everybody wondering why we started a little bit late. I just got home a little bit later than I wanted to today, and didn't get a chance to get the show scheduled and everything set up like we normally do. So I apologize for that. That's all on me. That's not on Jordan. So but the show must go on. As you guys can see, I'm missing
it's on both of us. This is a team effort.
That's right.
It's on both of us.
Team effort. I don't have my headphones. I can't find them. I don't know what I did. I had them earlier today. I was using them, and now I can't find them. I don't know. It's just one of those days, Jordan, where you kind of did a lot of running around, and you just kind of ran out of time. So that's where we're at. But I appreciate everybody being in here right now. We got 11 people in the live chat. Let's give a shout out to the comment section, Jordan, before we get into tonight's show and start talking about our various topics. We got Tiggs in here, one of our loyal supporters. Appreciate you being in here. Droid132 is in here. John Sarian in here, always in here as usual. Jackson Johnson. Jay is in here, one of our guys that's in here every single time we go live. Appreciate that. Philip Brister's in here. Joey Foster's in here. Thanks for stopping by. Really appreciate it. He does a lot for the Voice of College Football platform as a whole. does a great job. So show him support as well. Will, our resident Notre Dame fan, is in here as always. Appreciate that he always stops by when we go live. Go check him out as well. Big Lowe's in here. Let's see who else we got. Isaac Smith is in here. And I think that is it. I hope I didn't miss anybody. Appreciate all of you for being here and getting into the comments section already. We got a few planned topics that we're going to talk about to kick off the show, and then we're going to turn it over to the comment section. So you guys, start thinking about your questions. Start thinking about your topics that you want me and Jordan's opinion on. Could be college football, could be Clemson football, could be not related to college football at all, honestly. So that's how we'll roll with the show tonight. But with all of that said, Jordan, let's go ahead and get into our first topic of the night. And I think where we'll start is the spring games. We talked about Clemson spring game ad nauseum in our last episode. We went through position group by position group, gave our opinions, what we saw on the field, how we felt about it, some deficiencies that we saw, some things that obviously need to develop over the summer. But Clemson is not alone in the fact that their team is not fully, fully together as a team, because they have people coming in the summer that are going to complete this roster. But two, they're not alone in the fact that they have areas to work in for their team heading into the 2024 season before it kicks off. So we're going to go ahead and talk about a couple spring games of some bigger opponents that Clemson will face in 2024, and just kind of give our thoughts on how we felt about their spring game and how we feel about, the team as it stands right now. If the game kicked off now, how we feel about, that game heading into 2024. Obviously, not every spring game has been played to this point, but we'll go ahead and kick it off with none other than the Georgia Bulldogs because, well, that's coming week 1, Saturday, August 31st. We play the Georgia Bulldogs. Everybody knows how that went down last time when it was played in Charlotte just 2 years ago when DJ Uiagalelei was making his first start. Not his first start, but you get what I'm saying. He was the first-year full-time starter.
Yeah.
Played that Georgia game. It was a defensive game for sure. Not a ton of offense. The only touchdown scored in the game was a pick six thrown by DJ. But we do kick the season off with the Georgia Bulldogs once again. This time it will be in Atlanta, and Georgia held their spring game just this past Saturday. I got a chance to watch the spring game. They kind of break it up a little bit differently than the Clemson Tigers do. Obviously, they go true first-team offense versus true first-team defense, so on and so forth, with true first-team or true second-team offense against true second-team defense. So that's kind of how they break it up. So a little bit different, whereas Clemson kind of splits the team in half and kind of somewhat tries to make it even, but it was, you could definitely tell where majority of the starters were even for Clemson. So what were your thoughts kind of on the Georgia Bulldogs, their spring game in general, and kind of what you saw on the field? Obviously, they got Carson Beck returning. That's a huge get for them. He played absolutely amazing last season. We got no reason to expect that he won't continue the way that he has been playing. Heard a couple Georgia fans talk about, they'd like to see his deep ball get a little bit better. Obviously, they threw the ball a ton. If you watch the Georgia spring game, it was kind of surprising how much they threw the ball. They were like, we're basically not running the ball today, essentially is what they did. I mean, they threw the ball. I don't know the numbers, right off the top of my head, but they threw the ball a ton of times. So you could tell that they were really working that passing game. They were really trying to get a feel on that and kind of see where their DBs were, kind of see where their passing offense was. Maybe that's a result of they feel comfortable about their running situation and they don't feel that they really need to rep that as much as the passing situation. But with all that said, what were your thoughts on the Georgia spring game and, just how they looked as of, the end of spring now heading into summer?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, they looked like Georgia. I mean, just kind of what we've been accustomed to. I mean, you talk about Carson Beck. He's definitely one of the best quarterbacks returning in all of college football this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think what stood out to me the most really was their skill positions. They've kind of Georgia has not been known for their skill guys over the years, particularly at the wide receiver position. Really under Kirby Smart and really in a while. I mean, I think they only have one 1,000-yard receiver in their entire program's history as far as the season goes. So they haven't been particularly dynamic at receiver, even though they've had some names. I mean, AJ Green is one of the he didn't even have an 1,000-yard season, but they've had some names. Of course, George Pickens is tearing it up in the league too. But I think this is kind of like from top to bottom. I think this is one of the more impressive wide receiver rooms that Georgia's had in a while. I think they just have a good infusion of experience and youth. And I thought they showed out. Dylan Bell is a guy that they're expecting to have a kind of a breakout year. He's not an overly imposing or special like athlete at the receiver position, but he's solid. They use him in a lot of gadget situations. I don't think he's like a first round type guy, but he is expected to have a really big year and kind of step up. Now that some of the older guys have left the program, they brought in the transfer Colby Young from Miami. He's a guy that Clemson fans probably remember. He had a big game last year against the Tigers, and he caught a touchdown pass. And he was originally a JUCO guy, and he's just sort of kind of worked his way up, and now he's one of the top receivers for a pretty good Georgia squad. And then, of course, Dominic Lovett is returning, and that's huge for them as well. So that's kind of like a 1-2-3 punch that looks really, really good. And I think coupled with Carson Beck throwing them the football, I think Georgia's passing attack honestly is probably the strength of this team. I would expect. I thought offensive line wise, they're still really, really talented. Didn't really get to see too much of the running backs. Obviously, Trevor Etienne coming in and transferred in, expected to be their number one back. You saw him. Of course, they have Roderick Robertson and Branson Robinson. Also, Andrew Paul, who showed out a little bit, but he just recently entered the transfer portal. I'm sure Clemson fans probably remember his recruitment. That was one that the Tigers were squarely in it for and ultimately did not end up winning it. So, Georgia offensively looks to be in really good shape overall. Honestly, I think the other side of the ball is which is really strange to say about Georgia. Defensively, I think they're going to be I still think they're going to be Georgia. Like, I think defensively they're going to have a really good defense this year. So, Don't get me wrong when I say this, but they don't look as overly imposing as they have in years past. And maybe that's just because they had some really special talent, especially along the defensive line.
Right.
I don't think they have those guys this year. I think they have some really, really good young pieces, but they don't look like overly imposing or terrifying. Like I feel like we're not facing the 2021 Georgia defensive line. That's for sure.
Thank God.
Yeah, thank God. Because
I don't want to go against that defensive line again. If I'm being honest, like that.
Yeah, they look solid, pretty good. Like they would be starters for a lot of teams in the country, and they would be really good for a lot of teams in the country. But they don't look like just a overwhelmingly dominant defensive line. And I think they're still young in the defensive backfield. So that's something that I kind of want to watch as well. So I think the Georgia defense, honestly, is not – they don't – as it stands right now, they don't scare me as much as Georgia's offense does. And that's kind of weird to say, considering how Georgia has won, under Kirby Smart. That has been their calling card is freak athletes along the defensive line. And just really, really good, defenses in general. historically great defenses in certain cases.
Yes.
So yeah, I think they're going to be a really good football team. So, they're still going to be squarely in the playoff conversation, national championship conversation. But they don't look unbeatable right now. Like as it stands right now. And again, it's a spring game, so you can't take too much away from it. But they don't look like the dominant force, like unstoppable force that they seem to be in 21 and 22. And I think you kind of saw some of the cracks a little bit last year. So I don't think they just have a ton of special generational dudes, defensively this year. And I think that could potentially work in Clemson's favor, in week one. It may not be such a just a physical mismatch that it was in 2021, especially, their defensive line going against Clemson's offensive line. So
that might have been one of the biggest mismatches ever seen. It was an absolute domination by that Georgia defensive line for that entire game, from snap one until the clock hit triple zeros. They were relentless, and they did not give our offensive line a chance. Our offensive line never had a chance going into that game against that defense. So I agree with you. Obviously, their defense probably not quite as good as that 2021 team. At least we hope not. I don't want to play a defense that's that good again, especially starting the season for 2024, especially knowing some of the growth that still needs to be had along the offensive line and the offensive side of the ball for the Clemson Tigers. Maybe some of that is, Georgia does have a really good offense, and that makes their defense look a little bit more human, if you will. That probably plays into it some as well. But there's going to be no shortage of talk about this matchup between Clemson and Georgia heading into the 2024 season. I mean, this is going to be a huge game, and it's going to be a measuring stick for the Clemson Tigers. It's going to tell us, just where we stand when it comes to, are we trending back in the right direction that we want to, or are we not? And I think, we're going to find out really early on in the season, and we're going to know, just how competitive Clemson could be, at or near the top of college football in the 2024 season. So we won't have to wait very long to figure it out, Jordan. But we got plenty of time to talk about that game. Let's move on to another Clemson competitor that we will face this coming fall, and that is no love lost here. The NC State Wolfpack, your second favorite team, or so I'm told. I shouldn't say that. I'm sorry.
April Fool's Day was 17 days ago, man.
Yeah. So the NC State Wolfpack, they obviously had their spring game as well. This will be a team that we play in week 3 of the 2024 season. A team that, let's be honest, we've struggled with a little bit. Obviously, we've lost in recent history of losing to this team when we probably shouldn't have. We haven't played our best at times when we're playing NC State. The last thing that I like doing is losing to Dave Doran, for sure. There's definitely, if you follow this, I'm not going to call it a rivalry, but this kind of feud, I guess, between Clemson and NC State, more specifically Dabo Swinney and Dave Doran. There's no love lost there. These two guys, frankly, just don't like each other. They don't get along. They don't see eye to eye on most things. They just, they're oil and water. So obviously they had their spring game this past Saturday. What were your thoughts on NC State? What do they look like? And what just kind of jumped out to you for them?
Yeah, NC State is a team that, a lot of people are pegging as kind of a sleeper team. They last season, they thought that maybe they had the team to take them over the top, and it just didn't really work out that way offensively. They were just too stagnant a lot of the year. And defensively, they've been really, really good for a while under defensive coordinator Tony Gibson. But I think this offseason, I think was kind of a wake-up call. This past season was kind of a wake-up call for Dave Doran, that they really needed to get more dynamic at wide receiver. And I think they've done that. Just from what I saw in the spring game, obviously NC State set up their spring game a little bit, a little bit different. They set up the first team offense against, the second string defense. It was very clear they wanted the offense to have a big day.
Yeah.
But they've done, but you can see the kind of the additions that they've made have kind of changed just the overall makeup of this offense. Of course, Grayson McCall is the big portal addition that they made in the offseason from Coastal Carolina. Has played a lot of football. His experience. I don't think he's an overly elite quarterback. He was in a really unique system at Coastal. But I think he's a very smart football player, and I think if he can get NC State's playmakers the ball, I think he should be pretty good. He'll be kind of the game manager in a good way / point guard for the offense.
Right.
And I think you saw that I think he had 200 yards in the first half, 16 for 20, really efficient. They hit explosive plays. I thought that was kind of the thing that we haven't seen from NC State. And I think that it starts with their receivers. Of course, we all know about Kevin Concepcion. And kind of the damage he did to Clemson last year. He was as a true freshman, he was one of the more dynamic playmakers as a true freshman in all of college football. So having him back was big, and he didn't even have that big of a spring game, which kind of tells you how they've kind of overhauled that room. Another guy that they are really, really high on is Wesley Grimes. He had a couple of really big catches in that game. And the other name that I'm sure Clemson fans will probably remember that has been getting a lot of hype this offseason is none other than Dakari DJ Collins. Former Clemson.
Who's that? I've never heard of him. I don't.
Yeah. Never heard of him. Of course, played as a true freshman in 2021 for Clemson. Struggled with injuries and kind of inconsistency and an inability to really get on the field in 2022. And of course, he ends up transferring out. Didn't have much of an impact for NC State in year one, but from all the talk in the offseason, he's definitely made a jump. And I think you kind of saw it a little bit in the spring game. So I just think that this NC State offense looks a lot better. A lot more dynamic. We haven't been able to say we've been scared of an NC State offense in about 6 or 7 years, really. So that they have a real playmaker at quarterback, not a elite NFL first round type quarterback. But he's a very smart quarterback, and he can make the throws that they need him to make in that offense. And so I think they have a different makeup this year, just at the skill positions. And I think at running back, they also have done some really good work. Most notably, adding Jordan Waters from Duke, who is a really, really good, really solid running back, really productive at Duke, and has made some waves in the offseason. So NC State offense looks to be poised to be much improved this year. How improved, that obviously that's yet to be seen, and we can't take too much from a spring game, especially when it was kind of set up for the offense to have a big day. And then defensively, I expect them to be, it's kind of a given at this point that they're going to be really good defensively. They do have some, names to replace, most notably Peyton Wilson. They do return Aiden White, one of the top defensive backs in really in all of college football that doesn't really get talked about enough, but he's back. They probably need to add a transfer here or there because they're a little bit young. But I think they're going to be, just a really stingy defense like they have typically been under Tony Gibson. So NC State look the part right now, like a team that could make some noise in the ACC. Now, will they? Obviously that's yet to be seen.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Look, obviously their offense looked much improved from last season in the spring game, albeit against second team. I saw somebody in the chat say they were playing the third string defense.
That might have been you. It might have been the third string defense. It might have been. I think they put the second team defense in the second half, or I don't remember how they did it, but it was certainly not their number ones.
Yeah, they obviously didn't put their best out there against the first string offense, and maybe that was their way of trying to give the offense a confidence boost and give them a little bit of momentum heading into summer and fall camp and all that kind of stuff. It could have been kind of a play there, or, it could have been just a way to, make it look a little bit better. But obviously they weren't going against the best defense. However, they did look pretty good. Grayson McCall, the kid's a baller. He's a guy that's going to use his legs a lot. He's going to get outside of the pocket. He's going to make you pay if you don't keep contain on him. He's obviously has the ability to hurt you with his arm as well. So obviously that'll be a challenge for Clemson this season. He's always, kind of been that guy that's just, I think the best way to describe him, he's just a gamer, right? Like he's just out there and he's going to make plays. And if you're not careful, he'll make you pay really quickly, specifically with his legs, but also with his arm as well. And I think they looked improved overall. We'll see what it looks like come the season. Obviously, Clemson doesn't play, or they play. When do they play NC State? Week 3, yeah. So we play in week 3, so we get them pretty early in the season. So we'll get to see them play a couple games with Grayson McCall and kind of see what the dynamic of that offense really looks like under him, because I think it's going to look a little bit different than it has in the past. But we'll get to see it for a couple games, and then obviously we'll get that game at home this season, which is a good thing. We don't have to travel to NC State. It'll be at home. I saw everybody in here talking about the Textile Bowl and how NC State is a rivalry game. I guess if you define it because it's a trophy, then I guess it's technically a rivalry game. I just haven't always considered it like one of our big rivalries. Like if you call too many teams rivals, I feel like it loses its kind of luster.
Yeah, I feel you.
About a true rivalry. But I do understand when people are talking about the Textile Bowl. There is a trophy at the end of the game every single season. So I get it's a bigger game than just normal regular season game. So I get it from that standpoint, but we'll see how they look. I think they did a awesome job by grabbing Grayson McCall in the transfer portal. I think that's probably the best addition they did to their offense, and I think it's going to change the dynamic of their offense. So how successful he'll be in the Dave Dorn system and that NC State offense, we'll see. We'll see if they, cater more towards his skill set and what he likes to do at the quarterback position. But, like you say, he had a big day on Saturday in the spring game, albeit against, the second or third string defense, depending on who you ask. Don't get mad at me, NC State fans. I didn't do it. Your coach did. Okay. So, but, again, another early game that we get in the 2024 season. So obviously we got to look at this spring game and take what we can from it and kind of gauge where we think NC State's going to be. I think they could be an improved team in 2024 and really kind of start putting it together, specifically better on the offensive side of the ball. But let's go ahead and transition to another Clemson opponent in 2024, and that is none other than the Virginia Tech Hokies. Now, this is a team that's been talked about quite a bit this offseason, Jordan, because of their returning production. They lead the ACC, I think, if I'm not wrong. They lead the ACC in returning production. They have, pretty much not everybody, but the most returning production out of anyone in the ACC. They're a dark horse for a lot of people already to make some noise in the ACC and possibly win the ACC. So it's definitely a team that people are already paying attention to as somewhat of a dark horse. So what were your thoughts on the Virginia Tech spring game and just kind of your perspective on them with all this talk of how much returning production. Did you see that translate to their spring game? And what's your kind of gauge on them as we sit at the end of spring, heading into summer and fall camp?
Yeah, this team is very similar. I think their issues last season were very similar to NC State's,
Mhm.
but kind of to a greater degree. But what they've shown so far under Brent Pry is that they've improved massively, significantly defensively, which you would expect. Brent Pry is a defensive guy, but offensively, was always the point of concern, and some the side of the ball where Virginia Tech has frankly just been very average to below average
Right.
for several years. But I think you saw a lot of promise last year from signal caller Kyron Drones. His playmaking ability with his legs certainly showed out. But they definitely needed to get more dynamic from a receiver standpoint, and I think you saw that. I don't know. My lights just went out. I'll fix that. So I really think that they have done a lot to address, some of those issues. And having experienced guys return like Jalen Lane, Stephen Gosnell, Daquan Felton is a really big deal. And then another guy that hasn't really gotten talked about is Ali Jennings from Old Dominion. He was a transfer that came in last year and only played in 2 games before suffering a season-ending injury. I think that this Virginia Tech receiver room is in a much better place than it's been in quite a while.
Yeah.
And so I think that's something that kind of showed out a little bit in the spring game. I still have, my questions, from just the overall makeup of the offense. I think their backs are a little bit better. But I think that kind of what is kind of driving them forward is they definitely look like an experienced and together group. And just obviously with having, all of your starters, I think all 22 starters are coming back from last year. I think that's a recipe for, a step forward. Doesn't necessarily, guarantee it, but you'd rather have that than not. And I think they have some quality football players and some guys that can make some plays on the offensive side of the ball. And defensively, I expect them to be, really good, especially if they, take another step forward. So yeah, Virginia Tech is a team that, I think a lot of people have circled that game in Blacksburg for Clemson as sort of a game that to watch out for that, maybe not a lot of people are talking about. And I think I understand why. That could be a matchup that is a lot bigger when that game rolls around than it looks initially. But yeah, I think Virginia Tech, has, they have the ingredients right now to take a step forward. But it's just about, will they? I think they're in a much better shape than they were, during the waning years of the Justin Fuente era. So we'll see if Brent Pry can continue to kind of bring that program back. And it's kind of a big time for them with all of the conference realignment going on,
Right.
and kind of their position in the future of, college football. I don't think it's in, limbo because I think I don't think they would be left out of whatever the new look of college football is, but making themselves more attractive as a brand, that has had some success in the past, is important for them. So Virginia Tech is a team I'm definitely, keeping an eye on. And I thought their spring game, while it didn't show us a ton, I think you saw some of the improvements that they've made on the offensive side of the ball in particular. So yeah, that's kind of my thoughts on VT. Let me see if I can fix this light.
Yeah, I mean, look, there's a ton to be said about experience. It's one of those things that in college football, when you have a big portion of your roster come back and most of your production come back, that team is going to have a lot of growth. That team, obviously, they're going to have a lot of leadership. They're going to they're going to be better in aspects, maybe not from a pure talent standpoint, but just from a leadership standpoint and just knowledge of the program, right? You mentioned Brett Pry. You mentioned, how they're, obviously this is going to be the year that we see if they can trend in the right direction. And we're going to get this game, week 9. This can be a November 9th game. Dabo Swinney likes to talk about that as championship phase of the season. And, this could be a much bigger game come November 9th, 2024 than it is right now, April 18th, 2024, right? And they are getting a lot of, preseason love, if you will, because of their returning production. And I don't think it's necessarily all hype, although obviously they're going to have to go out there and prove it on the field. Just because you have a ton of returning production doesn't always equate to you're going to be a great team. But, it's a lot better than not having most of your production returned. So I think this could be, Virginia Tech could, end up being a really good team. They can end up even competing for an ACC championship if all the chips fall correctly and if some of the people that are, making the preseason predictions are correct. So it's obviously a game that will be big. It's in Blacksburg. Clemson hasn't lost to Virginia Tech in a long time, but that doesn't mean anything. Your previous wins don't necessarily guarantee your next win. So obviously it's a team we'll have to keep our eye on as the season progresses and see, what they look like if the preseason hype is real, or if it was just kind of, preseason magazine fodder and, there wasn't much to pay attention to it. So obviously those will be questions that will need to be answered as the season goes on, but I can't wait to see it. I hope they have a good season. You mentioned the landscape that we are currently in, in the state of college football with all of the, conference expansion and the flux that the ACC is in right now with lawsuits against Florida State and Clemson. It would be in, like you mentioned, I don't think Virginia Tech gets left out of anything, even as they stand right now as a football program. But it'd be a lot better if you started kind of an upward trajectory right now as we're in such a unstable time in college football. It would obviously add to their value. They're valuable already, but it would add even more to the value of a team like Virginia Tech. But yeah, no, we'll see how that goes. Obviously, as we get closer to the season, and then obviously through the season, as we'll be previewing this game, as we get closer to it, closer to fall camp, really, we'll kind of preview the whole schedule and all that. But I think that kind of wraps up our talk, at least for the spring games, and at least to this point, all our current 2024 opponents that have played spring games so far. Obviously, a ton more to happen this Saturday. Can't wait to watch some of the spring games coming up. Obviously, you got Florida State. I'm sure a lot of people are going to be making a big deal about what DJ Uiagalelei looks like, whether it's really good or really bad. That'll obviously be a big talking point on Clemson's message boards and probably Twitter. Either way, whatever way it goes, whether he looks like, the next coming of, whatever great quarterback you want to name, or he looks like, he don't look very good, right? It'll be a big talking point regardless, but, excited to see the rest of the spring games and kind of feel out the rest of these Clemson opponents that we have on our schedule for the 2024 season.
Yeah, absolutely. Based on kind of what we just talked about, do you feel? I mean, we've already previewed the schedule and given our initial thoughts, but like when the schedule initially came out, do you feel any differently? Just based on what you saw, like, do you think any game is particularly going to be easy? You feel a little bit better or worse about a particular game, this far out? Since we've kind of gotten an idea of what these teams are shaping up to be in spring?
I think from if I'm talking from the Clemson defensive standpoint, I feel a little bit better. I really liked how our defense looked. Um, I like the aggressiveness. I like the hunger that we see from a lot of those young corners. Now, I'm sure there's going to be growing pains as we go throughout the season. But those guys, I mean, they look hungry. Um, if I'm being honest, I feel slightly better. Now, with in regards to Georgia, I still think that is a very tough game for Clemson. I mean, I think if Clemson plays their best game, you know, you very well might still lose that game, right? Because Georgia has been stacking talent for so many seasons, and they have been, that defense has been elite for such a long time, and it being the first game of the season scares me for our offense. Um,
Yeah.
we know how that worked in 2021. It did not bode well in that game, and then it seemed to carry for the rest of the season. So I think one of the big things as a Clemson fan is you hope that even if, you know, pretty much everybody in the country is going to pick Clemson to lose that first game against Georgia, and they should, right? There's nothing out there that would say the smart pick is Clemson, right? Everybody's going to pick Georgia to win that game because that's the obvious pick, right? But as a Clemson fan, I think you have to hope that our offense is able to produce in that game, because if we're not able to produce at all, if it looks similar to a 2021 situation for our offense, then we're in a bad way, right? So I don't feel I don't feel really any better when it comes to heading into that Georgia game, to be completely honest, because yes, the Georgia's defense look a little vulnerable at times in their spring game, but at the end of the day, it's a spring game, and Kirby Smart is their coach, and their defense has been elite for such a long time. So in that game, I don't really feel any better. When it comes to like an NC State and thinking about Grayson McCall, I think we have the linebackers that are athletic enough that are not going to allow him to beat us in the way that he would try to beat us in, right? So I think we have, one, the defensive line, and two, the linebackers to be able to contain him, keep him inside the pocket, and not let him play his game. So I feel good about that. And then obviously the last one we kind of talked about was Virginia Tech, but overall, I feel really good about where this defense is. I think this Clemson defense could be a really special group in 2024. Barring injury or anything like that, I truly like where that defense is. And Wes Goodwin has given me no reason to believe that he won't continue to build this defense and trend it in the right direction. And one of the big things heading out of spring for me for Clemson was I feel much better about the defensive end position than I did heading into spring. And that was pretty much the biggest question mark for the defense heading into spring. And I think they answered it, and they answered it in a positive way. So for the most part, I feel better exiting spring as a Clemson fan. But that week one scares me, man. Like that week one for this offense, with some new guys, some freshmen that we're probably going to ask to play some pretty significant roles, not a comfortable game to kick off the season with. Let's just be honest.
No, definitely not. Definitely wouldn't have been upset to have seen us schedule, like the Citadel or Charleston. Well, maybe not Charleston Southern with how they with the scare that they gave us last year in a way. I wouldn't say scare, but just the mess that game was. That was probably the messiest 40, 50, nearly 50-point blowout I've ever seen. Georgia definitely not the easiest opponent you could have scheduled, but that's the way it works. And
hey, there you go.
But I always I always enjoy playing Georgia, but it definitely is not a great time with how kind of Clemson is their roster is shaken out, and kind of their recent results have indicated. But for me, I think the schedule, just from what we've seen in the spring, kind of how I feel about these teams. I think the one good thing, especially with respect to the Georgia game, like I don't think they are unbeatable. I don't expect Clemson to get completely physically overwhelmed in that game,
Right.
like they were.
That would be really unfortunate to see.
That would be very unfortunate. I do think Clemson is in a better spot from a overall makeup standpoint offensively.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, that 2021 offense was in disastrous shape, and we didn't really realize it until we saw it with our own eyes. And obviously, that season was just a disaster offensively in general. It's definitely not in that kind of shape. I think you are, you have a lot of experience coming back on the offensive line.
Right.
You have a quarterback going into his second year as a starter. How much of a jump he makes is obviously the biggest point of where this season ends up playing out. You have a clear number one back, and you have I think a very capable stable of wide receivers that you have at your disposal, and tight ends for that matter. So I think offensively, you're in better shape to face a defense like Georgia than you definitely were, especially in comparison to the last time we played. But do I feel great about them? Actually, scoring and putting up a ton of production. Obviously that is kind of a different question. It kind of reiterate your points. Like, I still don't feel great about that game, but I don't feel completely like, hopeless. Like I think there is a way, there is a world where Clemson puts it together and wins that game.
Yeah.
But we have to see that. Obviously, it starts with Kate Klubnik, and then of course the offensive line, and just this offense in general being what it was advertised to be. And then as far as the kind of, with NC State and Virginia Tech, they definitely look like really tough games on paper. But I think that was kind of the case to begin with. I mean, especially with NC State, we kind of knew, like, especially with recent results, we lost 2 of 3 now. It's like, well, that's a game we're going to be circling anyway.
Right. Yeah.
So I think the schedule still, especially in the schedule, is tricky, but I still feel that it's tricky, but manageable. I think the first half, the first half is really what will kind of determine how we think of this team.
Yeah.
Because it's really front loaded. You have Georgia, Florida State, and NC State within a 5-6 week period. It's pretty rough.
The first 5 games of the season are, there's a couple ones in there that shouldn't be as bad, but
and then of course you sandwich App State in there.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. So like the first 5 weeks of the season for Clemson are Georgia, App State, North Carolina State, Stanford. That should be the easiest game of all of them. And then we roll into Florida State. Yep. So first 5 weeks of the season, that's pretty tough. That's a tough draw to kick off the season.
Yeah, absolutely. And so this team has no choice but to get off to a pretty, I don't want to say hot start, but they need to look they need to look closer to what they'll eventually be than past teams have. It's been they start out the past few seasons they started out really rough and really just kind of improved over the season went on. But of course that was after you already took a couple of losses.
Right.
And so, yeah, it can't be that this year. You just don't have the luxury. You 4 of your first 5 opponents are Power 5 opponents, and the 5th opponent is a really, really good group of 5. So that is very, obviously that's very notable. All right. Anything else?
No, I think that'll wrap it up for the spring game, or all the spring games that we're going to talk about today. Obviously, we'll talk some more spring games next week. We'll talk some more opponents of Clemson that are on the schedule next week, and we'll kind of outline those and tell you what we thought about their spring game and where they stand and where we stand relative to them exiting spring. So that'll be fun to talk about next week, but we can go ahead and transition into our next topic, Jordan, and we're going to talk a little transfer portal. And interestingly enough, the transfer portal has been somewhat quiet in the world of college football, not just for the Clemson Tigers, but college football as a whole. A lot of people were talking coming into this transfer portal window that opened up this past Monday, right? Been open up for 4 days now, talking about, it was going to be crazy. It was going to be, kind of a big time transfer portal window. There was going to be a lot of big names. There was going to be a lot of big transfers. Fan bases were going to be freaking out here and there. And it hasn't been the case so far. Now, things could still happen. There's still spring games to be played, right? So there's still a lot of teams that are going to play their spring game. And, people that are going to transfer in spring are going to tend to transfer after the spring game as opposed to before the spring game. But it hasn't been quite as is on fire as we anticipated, heading up to the last portal window, obviously, before we hit fall camp and start the 2024 campaign. Clemson has yet to have a player enter the transfer portal at all. So good news for the Tigers. There's no news. So in the transfer portal season, if you're a Clemson Tigers fan, no news is good news.
Right. Not like we're taking anybody. So
yeah, we ain't taking anybody. So if there's any news for Clemson in the transfer portal cycle, it's usually bad news because somebody's leaving and going to another university to play football. So what are your thoughts on, obviously, the transfer portal situation at Clemson? Do you think there still will be some individuals who decide to enter the transfer portal for Clemson? And then from a national standpoint, are you surprised by the lack of transfer portal entries since Monday?
Yeah. From a Clemson perspective, obviously this is a 15-day window from so there is still obviously a lot of time for things to change.
Oh yeah.
And it can, and it's important to reiterate that the transfer portal window is just the amount of time you have to put your name in.
Right.
You can put your name in and wait till the window ends. You can wait up to the very last day. But as long as you put your name in, you're eligible to transfer and be eligible for the next season. And now, of course, with the new rule that you can, as long as you're academically eligible, you can transfer as many times as you want. It definitely adds another wrinkle to it. So a guy could theoretically enter the transfer portal, transfer, commit somewhere, and then transfer again within that 15-day window. So there's a lot of crazy things. Yeah. So there's still a lot of time left. But from a Clemson standpoint, obviously, like you said, no news is good news. We've heard a couple of names that but before the window opened that were they kind of been swirling around in the rumor mills. But so far, obviously it's pretty quiet. Now I'll say, if I had to put money on it, I would still expect some departure or maybe a few for Clemson at some point during this window. But So far, with and this kind of transitions to your next question about just college football in general. We haven't seen a ton of big names really enter the portal.
Right.
It hasn't been the on fire, just names you wouldn't expect. It was kind of advertised that, oh my God, like this is going to be the wildest transfer portal cycle we've seen in a minute. And, so far, again, I will say so far, it hasn't really been the case. There have been a couple of names that, but, there hasn't been that bombshell, there was, Cormani McLean from Colorado, that obviously a big name, former 5-star. He transferred. Jacoby Matthew from Texas A&M. You had that defensive lineman from Kent State that was light did it again. Why is it's my ring light? I don't know why it's stopped working. Okay, well, I'll fix that later. But but there just hasn't been a ton of big names. I see people in the chat mentioning Jaden Rashada. Yeah, of course he entered as well. Obviously, his recruitment was a roller coaster from an NIL standpoint and ended up at Arizona State, but now he's in the portal. But yeah, there hasn't been that just like, oh my God, I never expected him to enter the portal, or
Right.
It hasn't really been that. For all of the guys that have entered, they're kind of like, well, I kind of understand why he did. Maybe Jacoby Matthew from A&M was a little surprising because he was a starter, but I don't know. They're just, again, there hasn't the Louisville linebacker was a starter, but Louisville fans seem to think that he lost his starting spot. I don't know. But there hasn't been that bombshell household name enter, and you just kind of thought that was going to be the case. And so knock on wood. But it doesn't seem like it's going to be as crazy as maybe we thought. But and I've seen some theories that guys are just kind of waiting to see whether they'll their collectives will pony up their last paycheck before they enter, or they're still negotiating. Which, hey, in some cases that might be the case.
For sure. Yeah.
But so far it hasn't been as hectic, and I don't think Clemson is going to be. Let me not say that. I think Clemson is in a good spot to retain pretty much most of the guys they expect to rely on.
Right.
So I'm leaving the door open for a surprise name here or there, but it doesn't seem like it's going to be a wild, catastrophic, departure that we didn't expect. If Clemson does have a departure, so that was my long-winded answer to your question on Clemson and kind of the portal window in general. It hasn't been what we thought it would be so far. So we'll see if things change in the coming week or so.
Yeah, I think it's pretty interesting. Obviously, we have until April 30th. The transfer portal window will be open for 15 days. So from April 15th to April 30th, all these players have the ability to enter their name in the transfer portal, and they can take their time deciding on where they go. As long as they enter it before that April 30th date expires, they will be free to transfer. You mentioned the rule that the NCAA has been about. I think they had their last meeting today about it. Sounds like it's going to be a go. I think there's some formality of approval that has to happen come Monday, but obviously it's just formality. The new transfer portal rule will be enacted because, well, let's face it, the NCAA can't enforce any of their transfer portal rules anyway. All they do is end up in court. All they do is get smacked by every court that they end up in. So, the rule on transfers is there are no rules. That's the new rule for transfer. So you can transfer as many times as you want to as many schools as you want. It doesn't matter. As long as you're academically eligible, you can transfer within the transfer windows, obviously, to any school you want. And obviously the only stipulation is you can't play for more than one team in a given season. So those are really the only limitations to the transfer portal rule at this point. Now, speaking from a Clemson standpoint, I think it's important for as much flack as Clemson gets in the transfer portal arena, if you will, right? Dabo Swinney gets killed for the transfer portal. Clemson, as a university, as a football program, gets killed for how they go about the transfer portal. And obviously, Dabo Swinney is the one that sets that culture and makes those big decisions, right? But what I will say is that you have to give credit where credit is due, right? And Clemson, for a long time, has been less affected than a lot of schools out there when it comes to the transfer portal. And the one reason is because, as much as everybody in the national media and certain fans out there want to say that Clemson doesn't dabble in the NIL world and they don't do NIL and all this stuff, yes, they do. And they do it for roster retention. So I think it's important to give credit where credit is due. This is what Clemson has traditionally been really good at since the transfer portal, became a thing. They've been really good at roster retention. We talked about it on last week's show, Jordan, about how we couldn't think of, too many big names that have left Clemson, especially starters. There's been a few here and there, but a lot of times there's, a disciplinary situation or something else that's going on there. Traditionally, Clemson does not lose starters. And one thing that they have done really well at Clemson with their NIL is be able to retain their current roster. So as much as they don't use NIL to recruit high school players and portal players, they do use it to keep players on their roster that they already, have on the football team. So I think there's something to be said there. A lot of people disagree with, should Clemson change their philosophy on the transfer portal? Should they not? Should they change their philosophy on how they use NIL? I think there's legitimate arguments on both sides, but I think it's important to point out the fact that I think it's no coincidence that Clemson doesn't lose nearly the amount of players that other universities do. And I think the reason is how they divvy out their NIL and how they make it focused on, hey, you're here, you've proven that you're dedicated to this program. Here's some money for all your hard work, right?
Absolutely. And I think one of the other things that, I think it's kind of almost a self-fulfilling prophecy in a way, because just due to how Clemson, recruits. I think they do a good job of identifying guys that are true culture fits and that, are going to want to stay. Every team tries to do that, but, I think Clemson in particular has done a fairly good job. We've talked about Clemson hasn't really lost a ton of guys that we said, oh man, we kind of wish we had him this year.
Right.
So you're gonna, they're not immune to the transfer portal, and they've certainly lost a player here or there
Sure.
that you would have liked to have kept, but overall it hasn't hurt them as much, because I think they've done a good job of evaluation from not just from a talent standpoint, but from a culture fit, personality standpoint. It's like, are you a guy that's going to jump at the the nearest or at the soonest offer that you can get? Clemson doesn't recruit a ton of those guys, and they've done it. And it's something kind of Dabo talked about. He said it. One thing that the NIL has made it easier for him is recruiting, from a just kind of identifying who wants to be here and who doesn't. It's just made it a lot easier. It's like, well, if you come in here asking me, your first thing you're asking about is money. Well, we're probably not, not who you need to go with, and probably not who we need to add. And there's nothing wrong with a player, asking about compensation and prioritizing that. I don't think that's an issue, but clearly that means that these two, the player and school are not a fit, and so it makes it easier, and you don't waste your time, inviting this kid, this particular recruit to on visits or in recruiting events, and they're not really particularly interested in you.
Right.
because you can't offer what they're maybe being offered somewhere else. So I think with all of that put together, I think that's one of the things that the way Clemson goes about doing things has helped, and player from player retention standpoint. So I do think Clemson needs to make some tweaks in how they operate within the portal space.
Yeah.
But you can't deny the positives from kind of and how it's helped from a recruiting standpoint and a player retention standpoint. So again, there's still a lot of time left in this transfer portal window, so I don't want to speak too soon and say, oh man, Clemson's going to keep everybody, because that's probably not going to be the case. And maybe they do lose somebody that we don't expect, but just with how they've gone about doing things, it's been few and far between, compared to their peers. And I think that's something that should be noted.
Yeah, absolutely. I just think it's important to highlight that kind of stuff when we can, because I get a little tired of the narrative that Clemson doesn't do NIL. It's really, I'm not going to get off on a tangent or anything like that, but it's really lazy. And I still hear a lot of people say it, like Clemson doesn't do the transfer portal. Okay, that's true. We don't use the transfer portal. But when people say, oh, Clemson don't use the transfer portal or NIL, they need to evolve as a program. Like, Clemson uses NIL. Now, with that said, like, Clemson doesn't have, the NIL that a lot of these bigger alumni bases have. Clemson's a smaller school. They don't have, quite the money. We don't got, Tyson chicken like Arkansas or Nike like Oregon has, right? Like, we don't have those type of alums, at Clemson, and it's a smaller alumni.
We have Hooters.
We got Hooters.
Hooters NIL deal.
Yeah, we got Hooters, so you can get a Hooters NIL deal. But Clemson just traditionally, they're not going to be able to keep up with these schools that have these massive alumni bases when it comes to NIL stuff. It's just the fact of the matter. So they do have to be a bit more calculated when it comes to how they divvy up this NIL stuff, because it's not just unlimited. Like, you can't just throw all this NIL money out here and it's just going to magically keep refilling, right? Eventually, the NIL coffers, they're going to run dry. And then what do you do, right? So, as much as I would like Clemson to be a bit more aggressive in the transfer portal with cherry picking a few players here and there based off of your roster and based off of needs, I also do think it's important that they spend majority of their NIL on roster retention, because tampering and all this other stuff is running rampant in college football. And if you're not using NIL to keep players in the building that are already in the building, you're going to lose a lot of players. So I think that's important as well. But, it's just one of those things that I like to point out when I can, that Twin Peaks is better than Hooters, David Wood said. I'll take your word for it. But,
I've only ever been to Hooters. So, I don't have a comparison. Are we talking food or something else?
I don't know what he's talking. I have no idea. We probably shouldn't get into that. We probably shouldn't get into that.
Yeah.
Tig says Twin Peaks equals Hooters.
I'll take your word for it.
At least the business model is pretty similar. So,
yeah, very, very similar.
If you're talking business model, that's probably a correct statement for sure.
Great chicken. That's their selling point for sure.
Great, yeah, selling chicken wings, absolutely. Selling chicken wings. All right, let's go ahead and leave the transfer portal there. We will see how it progresses and where it finishes come April 30th. see how many names enter the transfer portal, but it's certainly been far less than anticipated, at least coming into the transfer portal. Again, we're only 4 days in. It could all change. It could just like there could just be a point where the bottom just drops out and tons of people go into the transfer portal and it's pandemonium in college football and our heads are spinning and all of that stuff. But we'll see. But we have 32 people, Jordan, in the live chat right now. So thank you guys so much for showing out. Really do appreciate it. If you have not hit that like button, please hit that like button. If you're not a subscriber, I don't know what you're doing. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Come hang out with me and Jordan. We're here every Thursday, 8 p.m. Yes, were we a little late today? But it'll be okay. We're always here. We may be a little late sometimes, but we're always here. But shout out to all the people that show up and contribute to this show. Really do appreciate it. You guys are amazing. And I think we missed a super chat, Jordan, which is
Did
not
we?
good.
Oh my goodness.
Apologies to IDK James. I literally just looked over and saw a starred comment, which means it's a super chat from IDK James. So sorry, dude. Did not mean to miss your super chat. It's greatly appreciated. Thank you for supporting the show. He said, I'd consider NC State a rival. Have kind of always been since I can remember. Never any love lost. That is for sure.
With you. Yeah.
No doubt about that.
I mean, you and I both have spent a large, portion of time in the state of North Carolina at some point or another. Obviously, I grew up. It's in a lot of ways, like I was more surrounded, for obvious reasons, I was surrounded by more NC State fans than I was even Gamecock fans.
Yeah.
And I also have a lot of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, ties in my family too. So that definitely didn't help. And so I've always hate losing to them. I think that's, especially within the conference, that's probably the team I hate losing to the most. And that has probably kind of fueled, that rivalry a little bit because
for sure.
On the whole, from a head-to-head standpoint, it's not very competitive, but just at different points, the schools share a lot of, history and, with it being the Textile Bowl and everything, you play for a trophy. But the passion between the two fan bases is definitely very potent. And that definitely makes for a lot of, more heated exchanges. And I think John Sarian mentioned it, Dave Doran, since he's arrived at NC State, I think he's kind of heightened the rivalry because
for sure.
His kind of his personality and obviously him and Dabo not obviously not getting along and not being the best of friends. I think that's definitely sort of sparked a little bit of the flame in that rivalry. And of course, just in recent history, NC State has won a couple of games, which is something they hadn't been doing the previous 20 years. And so it's kind of rekindled kind of that fire a little bit. So I consider NC State a rival. I mean, neither program is considers each other the most hated rival, obviously, but there definitely is some mutual dislike there that's very, very palpable. So have to agree. I consider them a rivalry, and especially within the ACC, that's probably the team I hate losing to the most. I can stomach losing I don't like losing to Florida State either, but I can stomach it a little bit more, and that rivalry is a little bit more. It's been around my entire life, but it's still from an objective Clemson standpoint. That hasn't been a rivalry nearly as long as NC State has been. So
right, and I can start to understand where you're coming from, Jordan, because where I live now, feels like I am surrounded by nothing but NC State fans, which is less than ideal. Let's just say, as a Clemson fan, not great. Obviously, I grew up in Charleston, so the rivalry between us and the Gamecocks ran deep because most of the people that I knew in Charleston were Gamecock fans. Like, there's a huge Gamecock fan base in Charleston, South
Oh
Carolina.
yeah.
Much more than Clemson. Like, if you're a Clemson fan in Charleston, you're the minority. Now, that may have changed since I had left. I've left. Haven't been there in quite some time, at least living there. So maybe that dynamic has changed a bit. But growing up, like, it was basically all Gamecocks. And if you were a small minority if you were a Clemson fan, obviously. So, but coming up, obviously where I live now, I understand kind of what you grew up around and why that North Carolina State rivalry for you is so heated because of all the NC State fans up here. It's absolutely insane. They're everywhere. So it's interesting that, as a Clemson fan, like, or a fan of anybody, probably, like, based off of where you stay, where you live, or where you grew up, like, rivalries look different to you for different teams based off of who you live around, and kind of the fan bases that you're exposed to the most tend to be the ones that you hate the most,
Right.
or want to beat the most because, on Monday morning you got to go see them, right?
Yeah.
There ain't no hiding, right?
Nope.
If you live in Wyoming and you're a Clemson fan and you lose to NC State, like, you ain't got to go see no NC State fans on Monday morning because they don't exist in Wyoming, right? But if you live in central North Carolina, you got to go see them on Monday morning, and they're going to be loud and they're going to be annoying, and it's going to drive you crazy. So I get you. I understand it way more now. But with that said, shout out to IDK James. He is always on here supporting the Clemson channel with super chats. I'm sorry that we missed it, and it's been so long since we kind of like, it was almost an hour ago that he super chatted.
We're usually on point with this stuff.
Yeah,
like this
so
is,
sorry,
this is
it was
ridiculous.
not on purpose. Apologies. But
and he dropped another one. We're not missing this one.
Appreciate you supporting the channel, and he goes ahead and drops another $5. Thank you so much, man. He says, I feel removed from some of it in Alaska. Sumter, kind of military boy here, was around a bunch of Carolina fans too. So,
I'm sure, being out there, you definitely don't have many people to get excited about, with Clemson football and discuss. I'm sure there's not a huge contingent in Alaska, but it's definitely a rivalry that's definitely, from a Clemson fan base standpoint, where you lived kind of depends on. Kind of determines how you feel about that particular, kind of like with Georgia Tech, and I think Georgia Tech is also kind of more of an age thing, because it used to. I think that rivalry was definitely. I definitely I get stronger opinions about Georgia Tech from older Clemson alumni and fans than I do, obviously, more of the younger ones. So it's kind of those two rivalries are always interesting to me, because different people within the fan base have them at different tiers. Like, some people don't care about the NC State game at all, and some people absolutely hate NC State almost as much as the Gamecocks. So it's it's really, and Georgia Tech is kind of the same. So I think there's a universal, we don't like Georgia, but especially with them being good as of late, but Georgia Tech and NC State are always an interesting case study, because where you live and how old you are definitely determines how you feel about those two particular rivalries.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. It's interesting to see the different perspectives, especially based off of where you live. So, appreciate the super chat. Thank you, man.
Absolutely. I did not mean to put that one up. All right.
All right, guys. I think we have reached the point in time in the show where we are going to turn it over to you. We're about an hour and 20 in. I think we've talked about everything that we wanted to talk about. Now it's time for the comment section to shine, and that's what you guys do every single time. So Go ahead and get your comments in, get your questions in. What topics do you want to hear about? What do you want me and Jordan's opinion on? Now is your time to do it. And while you guys are getting all of that into the live chat section, again, if you're not subscribed to the channel, please go ahead and hit that subscribe button. Please hit that like button. Me and Jordan are here doing the All In Show every Thursday at 8 p.m., at least for the spring. And then we'll transition back to our normal 7 o'clock time as I get done with softball and transition back to a more normal schedule. But appreciate all 28 people that are currently in the live chat and commenting. You guys are amazing. Really do appreciate it. IDK James for the super chats. Shout out to you for supporting the channel. And yeah, Jordan, let's see what the people want to talk about.
Let's do it. Will talking about Notre Dame and Clemson. Yeah, that's kind of we've talked about it. It's kind of like it's kind of a mutual, like I think both fan bases are it's kind of different because both fan bases are really cordial with each other. So it's like it's kind of a friendly rivalry is probably not the right word, but I'm going to use it anyway. It's kind of a pseudo rivalry. They've played a bunch over, especially in recent years, and they've had some really, especially on some very big stages. And so it's kind of I like playing Notre Dame, and I have a lot of respect for that fan base, and I think there's this kind of I think the two institutions have a lot of respect for each other, and I think that kind of just is kind of in the football programs in particular, because they operate in very very similar manners with how they go about their business. So I think it's I always enjoy playing Notre Dame, and I love they're definitely one of the better fan bases I've interacted with for sure. So there's definitely definitely seems to be a lot of mutual respect there. David Wood talking about my neck of the woods, sort of. Monroe, North Carolina. NC State has gotten a lot of kids really out of Union County in general. They do a good job at recruiting. This cycle is really interesting because obviously one of the Clemson's top targets on their board, Jordan Young, is from Monroe, North Carolina, at Monroe High School. Obviously a big time recruiting battle. NC State has been trying to get their foot in the door and kind of pushing. I think he did add them as one of his official visits, but I kind of still see that as sort of a Clemson Tennessee battle right now. But I think NC State is given him something to think about. I think they're on the back burner, sort of, but I definitely still think it's more of a Clemson Tennessee battle. So that might be a guy from Monroe that they don't typically get. Let's see. Jay says, I'm in Tennessee, so Dabo, please start beating the Vols. Yeah. It's been kind of frustrating as of late because, it's been kind of an all sport, Tennessee, like we can't avoid them for anything, and they seem to beat us at everything. Obviously the Orange Bowl, and then, baseball, the baseball regional last year, that took years off my life, and that one hurt a ton because you were a strike away from winning that game. And
they tend to be like, Tennessee's one of those fan bases where, like, I mean, we all know how long they struggled in football, and then as soon as they get good, like, I mean, they are just like, it's deafening. Because, I mean, they got a lot of fans. So as soon as they show any inkling of being competitive, like, they are just deafening on the internet specifically, but just in general. So, But I mean, that tends to be with like every fan base. Like I know this season, or this season, yeah, with Michigan winning the championship,
Yeah.
like where I live, I've seen so many more Michigan fans. Like they're just like repping the colors and the shirts and a lot of that is, probably more casual fans being excited about a national championship and all that kind of stuff. But yeah, no, I get his point because Vols fans can be.
They're a very interesting. They're very passionate about their team. Let's just say
Yeah,
that.
yeah. There's something else.
Yeah.
We'll just keep it cordial here. But,
Yeah. And just they've met, they've played Clemson a lot recently across all sports. And, they even softball, obviously the softball game this year. So it just, a year just like Clemson has, I think that kind of, it's not a rivalry for sure, but there's definitely been an increased, fire between the two fan bases because they've played so often as of late. And Clemson has not been on the winning end of those games. So that's, yeah, I definitely don't, I definitely would not like to lose to Tennessee again in anything because they won't let you forget about it. We have another super chat from IDK James, $10. Thank you so much. He asks a question about the ongoing lawsuits for Clemson and Florida State. He says, do you think FSU and CU should allow ACC to combine suits as was requested in their newest filings? They say it's so similar. Also, my dad, as CU alum, hates Notre Dame, but I don't. Yeah, there's I think on that last part, there is a contingency of Clemson fans that don't like Notre Dame, but that's kind of just I think that's more of a product of, I think Notre Dame is just a very, when you ask people about Notre Dame, like the reactions are usually pretty strong one way or the other. There's a lot, especially in the South, there is a lot of people that just hate Notre Dame in general. So I'm not one of them. I definitely I don't. I've just never. I think maybe it's because I've had good, experiences with their fan base. When we've played them over the years, but I think they're good for college football. Whether you think I think whether you like them or not, I think they are a fixture of college football, and the sport wouldn't be the same without them. And so I kind of appreciate and they're just it's a unique school. It's a unique they're a unique culture up there, kind of like how we Clemson is, and I appreciate that.
Yeah.
So I mean I've never really had I've never had the animosity for Notre Dame that maybe a lot of people down here do. It's never. I was like, I don't know. Maybe if I grew up when they were really good, like really really good, national championship caliber good, like in the 80s, 90s, I'd feel a little bit different. But because I think that's where a lot of people, just from their history, that's where a lot of people have built up, and you're just kind of taught to hate Notre Dame. But I haven't been able to get there. I definitely don't have those kind of feelings. So
Notre Dame for me is kind of hit. Like I don't necessarily have any hate towards Notre Dame. The one thing about Notre Dame I think that irritates me is the way, and it's not even really about Notre Dame. It's more about the ACC and the way that they allow Notre Dame to take advantage.
Oh yeah, conference. I don't like that either.
So from that perspective, it really irritates me, and it's really annoying to deal with as a member of the ACC. Hopefully, we're not a member of the ACC too terribly much longer. But with that said, I don't have any direct animosity towards Notre Dame as a university or a program or anything like that, other than what I just mentioned. For his question on, do I think FSU and Clemson should allow the ACC to combine lawsuits? Because
I would say no.
They're requesting that. To me, look, granted, Like, listen to this opinion with a grain of salt. I have zero knowledge about anything to do with the law or being a lawyer or, the technicalities that go on in courtrooms and things like that. I agree with Jordan. I would say absolutely not, because I think, and here's my reasoning, just an outsider that has no legal knowledge. I've never been to law school or anything like that, right? So obviously, but what I would say is the more fronts that we force the ACC to fight this legal battle, the better off we are. Because here's the problem: Florida State and Clemson are fighting two separate fights, right? Like, their perspectives on their lawsuits are different. The things and the language that they're targeting are different, and they can be because, well, they're two separate entities, right? But here's my other thought: is the ACC is fighting this on multiple fronts, and because they're fighting against the same type of stuff, backing, these documents, they have to be very consistent in their arguments. And that's really hard when you're arguing against multiple groups of attorneys on different fronts, whether it be in the state of
In
South
front of
Carolina
multiple judges too. Yeah.
or in the state of Florida or in the state of North Carolina, with three different judges and three different lawsuits, basically, or four different lawsuits, I guess you could say. Um, it's very difficult to keep your arguments buttoned up and to keep them, you know, synchronized, if you will.
Right.
That's probably not the word I'm looking for, but to keep your arguments where they make sense all the way through. Like, I feel like if you keep it on separate fronts, they might make a misstep when they're arguing something against Clemson that Florida State they can then exploit, right? And then vice versa with the
Yep.
two universities. So I think you give yourself a more tactical advantage, if you will, if you keep it on multiple fronts. But again, I don't know the legal system. I don't know if they'll be forced to make it all one big lawsuit. I think that would be unfortunate for the two parties involved in Florida State and Clemson. But that's just my, outside perspective with literally zero legal knowledge behind it.
Yeah, especially when it comes to contract law and like I
Yeah,
have like there's
no.
the language that and stuff that they're using is way over my head.
Right.
So yeah, but I think you made the exact points I was going to make. Like it doesn't. There's really no benefit I could see from Clemson and Florida State consolidating their lawsuits. Because again, like you said, it forces the ACC to stay consistent and to fight on multiple fronts. Like if you consolidate the two, then it's like, well, now you get to address everything at once and you don't, with one group of attorneys and everybody is together, and the ruling that they only have to rule on one case,
Right.
and then you're for both schools, if it doesn't go in your favor, well, now the whole thing is shot. I mean, of course you can appeal, but it makes things more difficult,
Right.
and it puts less strain on the ACC as far as their legal arguments is concerned. So, yeah, I'm totally with you. I don't see any benefit, obviously, again, from no legal knowledge, but I don't see a benefit for Florida State or Clemson to allow that to happen.
I mean, because you would think, like, whether Florida State wins and Clemson loses, or Clemson wins and Florida State loses, or both of them win, like, that benefits both universities, right? Like, whoever wins, it benefits anyone who's trying to get out of the ACC, right? So I think it makes sense from the university standpoint to fight it on multiple fronts. But again, will that be allowed? I have no idea, man. Like, all this legal stuff, like, I listen to people that are kind of involved in it and that are, have a way better understanding than I do. And even listening to them, I'm still like, I don't truly understand what is going on or the technicalities and all this kind of stuff. So it's kind of one of those things that's it's really just gonna have to play out. I mean, in my mind, it's a done deal. Like Clemson and Florida State, specifically those two, they're out of the ACC at some point. Like, however that looks, I think it can go a multitude of different ways. But they like the steps that both Florida State and Clemson have taken against the ACC. The bridge is burned, if you will, right? There's no going back from this, right? Like
Right.
these two universities have made it clear we are done with the ACC as a conference. How it all shakes out in the end, we don't know yet. But I do know that there is probably a 0% chance, or maybe a 0.1% chance, if you want to give an outside chance, that these two universities ever reconcile with the ACC. I don't see that as a realistic possibility at all.
Yeah, absolutely. All right. Hitting our next super chat, we got two more. They're flowing in today. Thank you, Will, for the $5. He asks, "How do you guys think spring games should be ran? I think that two coaches should do a draft for each position group," and that's how Clemson essentially does it.
Yeah.
I don't think there's a particular way to run a spring game, because at the end of the day, like the spring game is not really intended to be it's a practice. It's a scrimmage and all that. And, they coach them during those games, and, they're reps, but the real work you've already done in the spring. So like I have I like your suggestion and kind of like how Clemson does it. Like I want to see our good players playing against our good players. Like I don't necessarily want to see one side, one team weighted, too heavily in favor. But I understand why teams do it differently. Like, especially with, the way Ole Miss did it was, just, it was different. I can't say I loved it, but I understand why they did it. And like, I think it was probably fun for the fans. Like it's more of it's definitely not, as great of a TV product for sure. Nobody wants to watch a bunch of 7-on-7.
No.
But like, I'm sure it was fun, to be there if you're an Ole Miss fan, and they obviously had a lot of other events, the tug of war and stuff like that. So, it's kind of like a big, it's kind of like a big field day, like you used to have in elementary school, or in middle school. You did tug of war and relay races and stuff like that. It's just like one giant recess. But I don't think there's a particular way to do it, but there are ways that I like I like to see an actual football game for sure. And preferably I'd like to see them tackle. And I understand quarterbacks aren't live, but beyond that, like I want to see like players actually play. But that's just me being selfish. So I don't knock teams that don't do it that way or do it a little bit differently.
I don't necessarily knock teams that don't do it that way, but I don't particularly like it, and it's not something I want to watch. Like what Ole Miss did, not interested in it, dude. Like not interested in it at all. Like, sure, is it, I guess, somewhat entertaining for the fans that are in attendance and things like that, but it's just one of those things that, like, I don't know, man. Like, you just want to see a football game, right? Like at this point in time in the season, like, or not in the season, but at this point in time, college football fans are starving for college football, right? We want to see our teams play an actual football game, and I think that's important. And you see teams that are, not tackling Ohio State. You see teams that are doing all this gimmick stuff, Ole Miss, right? All these teams that are just doing this weird stuff, man. And like, I don't know where it's coming from. Like, I get it. It's spring. it's the 15th practice that you're allotted in spring, right? You've had 14 practices where you've had tons of development and you've been good on good, and you've tried to develop your roster and figure out what you got heading into the next season. And this 15th practice, named the spring game, is not really important, and it's just something to get the fans involved. And I get all of that, but I think when you get too far removed from resembling an actual football game, if I'm just giving my opinion, you lose me. Like, I'm not interested in it. I want to see something that somewhat resembles a football game. I would like to see teams actually be able to scrimmage a different team, like that wasn't their team, right? Like, and it could be structured, and it could be the same type of rules where you're trying to mitigate injuries as much as possible. But I would like to see that even, where there's some sort of competitive work against somebody that doesn't know you, right? Like, that hasn't practiced with you the other 14 practices, right? So that's kind of my perspective. Will that ever happen? No, probably not. But I mean, that's just, kind of the, my perspective on spring games and how they should be conducted. I like how Clemson does it. I like that they split the roster. I like that they try to make it as competitive as they possibly can. I even like that they split the coaching staff and kind of make it a true, like, game week experience where they're trying to, win a game, if you will. And I know that Clemson puts some stuff on the line that benefits the winning team. So there is something there that drives some competitive spirit in it. But again, I understand that you don't want anybody to get hurt. I mean, Clemson obviously held out quite a few guys that could have played. They weren't injured, but they were just veteran guys that you knew that, what you're going to get with them, and we're not going to let them play because we don't want them to get injured. So I understand it from that perspective as well, but it's just unfortunate as a fan to watch some of these spring games and be like, man, that's tough to watch.
Absolutely. All right. We have a couple more super chats, but I don't do want to
let's not miss
acknowledge other people.
Let's not miss anymore.
Big Load says talk Clemson. Cade Klubnik, enough on the Irish, haha. We'll definitely get to more Clemson centric questions. Let's see. I want to hit one before I go to another super chat. So I saw a couple of people talking about Tennessee and Clemson on the recruiting trail. That's another thing I forgot to mention. So there's definitely been a lot of Clemson Tennessee head-to-heads, not just like from a competition standpoint athletically, but recruiting too. So that definitely means we need to start need to beat them a little bit more on both fronts.
Yeah, especially on the recruiting trail. They've been getting the better of us for a couple years now on the recruiting trail. So we got to start trending that more in our direction for sure.
Yeah. Isaac Smith asks, how confident are y'all in the most recent crystal ball predictions with Sanders and Young? I still think Clemson is in very good shape with both. I think David Sanders. When it comes to David Sanders, there's definitely his most recent visits to Ohio State and Tennessee have given him stuff to think about. I still think it's going to come down to the official visits. But I think Clemson is still in really good. I think they're in good shape, and same thing with Jordan Young. So I think it's about really making that strong impression on that May 31st date, and then seeing where the chips fall. But again, I think Clemson is very squarely in good shape with both of those guys. But
I mean,
recruiting it's a very volatile game, and things can change. So I don't want to say they're locks or anything like that. Obviously,
it's one of those things that like you got to feel good that there were crystal balls put out there. However, as you know, Jordan, I mean, the recruiting game can change on a dime. I mean, literally in a second. A guy could be a lock for this university, and then all of a sudden he's going to a completely opposite university. So it's one of those things where Clemson is always going to recruit guys in a different way. And I don't mean that they don't give guys any NIL, but like I stated before about the reasons that Clemson needs to be calculated with their NIL, because of their alumni base and because of the limited funds. Are there universities out there that can 100% outbid Clemson every single time? Yes, which is why what Jordan talked about earlier on the show is important in our evaluation of not only talent but cultural fits, right? So if there's a recruit, and I'm not saying Sanders or Young are those recruits that are going to take the highest dollar out there offered, it's never going to be Clemson. Clemson doesn't have that kind of money in their NIL. They just don't. These other programs, these bigger alumni-based programs, can offer far more money. So if that is their sole decision-making, or if that is what is motivating them the most, Clemson is probably out, right? But, we don't know these guys. I don't know David Sanders, right? I don't know Young. I don't know what is most important to them or how they're weighing each individual thing, because there's a lot of things that these guys are weighing in the recruiting process. And, some of it is obviously going to be NIL. I mean, that without a doubt. Some of it's going to be NIL. Some of it's going to be education. Some of it's going to be, what coaches are on the staff. Some of it's going to be, what kind of college town it is. Some of it's going to be what kind of degrees are offered at the school. Like, there's a lot that goes into recruiting a college football player, and it really depends on that player and the family and how they weight those different things, and if a place like Clemson's going to be a fit, because Clemson is going to give these players NIL deals. Will they be as big as some other universities? No, but they will be there. You just got to decide what's more important to you, and
Right.
what's a better fit for you. So, with all of that said, I think we're in a great place with both of these guys. That doesn't mean we're going to land them for sure, but I think we are squarely in the hunt for both Sanders and Young. I could see a world where we land both of them. I could see a world where we land neither of them.
Yeah.
Both of those worlds exist.
Absolutely. That's the name of recruiting. And really, I mean, even before NIL, that was always the case. So, we're talking about 16, 17-year-old, kids at the end of the day, and things change. They change their mind, what their values change and what they're looking for.
And it's a tough decision to make, especially at a very young age. I mean,
especially with how good these players with especially these 4-5-star kids. They have a lot of people in their circle.
Right.
They have a lot of relationships and things to consider when it comes to choosing their school and their future. So it just there's a lot of things that influence that. So that's something to always keep in mind. And that's why, over the years, I've learned to not, get as worked up when things don't go your way from a recruiting standpoint, because that's just the reality and nature of it. All right. We hit a super chat from IDK James. Thank you once again. He's been really loading us up. And
shout out to you, man. Like, truly do appreciate.
Absolutely.
I know we say it, and everybody who gets a super chat on YouTube says it, but truly do appreciate your support of the channel and what me and Jordan do here. It does mean a lot to us.
Yeah, he says, my dad truly hates Notre Dame, was class of 78. Well, that makes sense when you consider that. Says, I don't know what happened back in those days, but it will make him angry if I support Notre Dame. Yeah, I think from that aspect, it makes sense because Notre Dame and Clemson did play a couple of times in the late 70s. Joe, I remember, I don't want to say I remember, but, Joe Montana came into Death Valley and beat Clemson. So there's a lot of,
right. Yeah. That's just that's the tale of two generations right there. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, there are a lot of older Clemson fans that remember that day, those years. And that was when Clemson was starting to take off a little bit, Charlie Pell, to Danny Ford. That was, so there were some pretty, those were some pretty hard fought games. And so there's probably some.
Yeah, that's.
Some bad blood.
I'm sure that hate runs deep for him, for sure.
Yeah.
That makes sense. Which goes back to what we were talking about earlier, Jordan, about how, not only where you grow up, but obviously which era you grow up in Clemson football. Obviously, you feel different about different teams. It's always fun to just get different perspectives, not only in other fan base, but just like your own fan base, based off of age or geographic or anything. It's crazy how much it differs.
Absolutely. And then I want to hit this 50 burger he gave us. And he clarifies on earlier Super Chase says, well, to sort of explain what more than likely that will happen, will go to federal court. Federal courts can opine and consider state law or kick would get messy. The NC case being combined may not work if venues change. Wanted your perspective as a fan. Yeah. And so, that's something that's definitely been talked about is, getting it to federal court. I don't think either side wants that to happen, to be honest with you, which is why I think if that does seem like a scenario that they could be reaching, I think that's when I think the settlement talks would really start to kick in, because once you start getting to federal court and the appeals process and all that, there's going to be a lot of stuff. We've talked about that discovery phase. Between the ACC and Clemson and Florida State, there's going to be a lot of skeletons in that closet that I don't think any of the parties really want to get out if they don't have to. And so, a lot of that could get really ugly. And so I could totally see a scenario where a number is agreed upon, an exit, as far as the exit fee and kind of what that entails. So, yeah, I would be surprised if this got to federal court, before, some sort of settlement was reached or if, it's not, if there is an appeals process that happens. Like I would be surprised if it got to federal court before both sides just decide to say, let's just nip this in the bud right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, I've always been of the opinion that this will end up in a settlement. This will end up in negotiation by both sides. I think it is in both parties' interests to end this with some sort of agreed upon set of circumstances that will allow Florida State and Clemson to exit the conference. And honestly, it's in the best interest of Florida State and Clemson to negotiate that deal. And it's in the best interest of the ACC. If the ACC is looking to be a conference going forward, they need to settle, just obviously from a fan perspective, they need to settle with FSU and Clemson, pretty quickly. And then they need to circle the wagons and try to hold on to the rest of what they have in the ACC and maybe add some other pieces, however the rest of the college landscape looks like. Because if they allow this to go to court and, maybe Florida State and Clemson loses, and then they would be stuck until the grant of rights runs out or until ESPN decides that they don't want to do business with the ACC anymore, whichever comes first, right? Or FSU and Clemson wins, and now you're sitting here without a conference. Because if FSU and Clemson wins, that means everybody wins. So all the other universities that are thinking about leaving are also gone. So now you have no conference to even try to hold on to and recover with, right? So like you said, I think it's in the best interest of all parties involved. Hey, Florida State, Clemson, this is what it's going to take. Hash that out back and forth in deliberation, agree upon an amount of money that it's going to take, Both universities pay it, they exit, and you get to try to stay relevant in this current landscape of college football, right? Or you spend a ton of money, um, and you gamble on the fact that you're going to win, right? So I think it's a volatile situation. Obviously, there's a lot of different state law that is being leveraged against one another. South Carolina law, Florida law, North Carolina law. None of them really agree. Different judges, all that kind of stuff. It's going to be interesting, but I'm with you, Jordan. I think this ends up in negotiations and some agreed upon, you know, set of circumstances that will allow each of the three parties to go separate ways.
Absolutely. And then one last super chat from IDK James, $10. He says, I don't want to distract from the chat. Please read them before my supers. I just want to support the content. No, you're fine, IDK James. We seriously, man, we appreciate the super.
Don't feel bad. We appreciate the support.
We're going to always like we said, we're always going to prioritize super chats.
Absolutely.
And so
if anyone is willing to give us a portion of their hard-earned money in order to put a comment in our live chat, we will absolutely highlight that as soon as we possibly can. That's just we appreciate the support.
All right, let's get a couple of other questions, and then we can get on out of here. David asks, is Peter Woods playing 5-stock? I'm assuming he means 5-tech defensive end. Yes, that's where he would. That's where he would be, playing on the outside. So that's kind of where he's been repping. We'll kind of see, but he's been repping all along the defensive line. So it's kind of a. He's just a guy they're going to play everywhere and at different situations. He may be a 5-tech, maybe a 3-tech. You could probably line him up at nose and in some pass rushing situations because he's just so good.
Peter Woods is one of those dudes that he could literally play any position along the defensive line, and be successful at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
I think the Dabo and the rest of the coaching staff has obviously made it clear that yes, he will be playing 5 technique at defensive end, but he will also play inside, at points and times this season as well, depending on the situation. So they're not, he's kind of gonna just be a guy that they use in a lot of different ways this season, because of his skill set and just because of who he is as a player. Not a guy you want to take off the field too terribly much unless he needs a breather over there.
Absolutely. Let's see. Dylan, on the subject of Dakari Collins, he says, I'm surprised that Dakari Collins didn't play much at all for NC State last year. I thought he played in key wide receiver roles at Clemson. Yeah, I wasn't necessarily surprised because I think, with Collins, when he played in 2021, it was really mostly out of necessity. They had no intentions of playing him that year. And of course, the 2021 season was probably one of the just most bizarre seasons from a injury standpoint that I've seen. Really any team have, but Clemson especially. That wide receiver room was absolutely decimated. We were starting
all the years. It seemed like all the years of health that Clemson had previously for like the previous 4 or 5 years all caught up to him in 2021, and everybody was hurt. It was insane. That was one of the most frustrating seasons as a Clemson fan. Both from an injury standpoint and obviously as a results on the field standpoint as well. But yeah.
So I think he was forced to play, and I thought he played admirable at a time where they weren't expecting to need him.
Right.
But I don't think he was ready to be a starter. And I think that showed at NC State. He still had some growing to do, and obviously just being at a new place and learning a new offense that obviously already puts you behind the eight ball with some other, at least compared to some other receivers. So, but from what it sounds like, he's definitely poised to be a bigger part of the offense this year, and he's made those strides. So, happy for him because they're just. Some guys they feel like they should be playing, and when probably they shouldn't. But I understand that you got to go where you feel like you can play, and that's kind of what happened with him at Clemson, and he had some influences in his inner circle that pushed him in that direction as well. So, but I'm happy to see that it could potentially work out for him because I do think he's a very talented football player. So I think he's poised to have a kind of a bigger year or a breakout season potentially. All right, let's see. Let me get one more. Jay says NIL is a big risk when it's pay for play, hard to juggle the fast money / no development for future NFL money. He said have to. I don't know if I said hard or have to juggle the fast money / no development for future NFL money, and slow money, maybe more development that leads to more future money. Yeah, I mean, you make some very solid point, and that's kind of the thing. But with these young athletes, again, they don't always have the the proper information and really the proper people around them to help them make those kinds of decisions.
Yes.
And so when you are obviously we all remember being 18 years old.
Yeah.
I can't blame, with some of the figures that have been reported and thrown around. I understand why these kids are jumping at it. And not especially in the short term, seeing the potential benefits of doing that. But then and it's easy to lose sight of, well, am I going to a place where I fit? Am I going to be developed? Especially these guys that have NFL aspirations, like is jumping in the portal for the next big offer, really doing the best for my development, because this money is nice now, but it's going to dry up. Like, I mean, none of these kids are getting life-changing money, but they're not getting money that will last, that you could retire on. And especially when you're a young kid, you don't know how to properly spend your money, invest and all that, and make sure it lasts. So even if a kid gets, even if somebody gets some of the higher numbers, in the 6-7 figures, like it's not going to last you a very long time if you don't know what you're doing, and that's just the reality that a lot of these kids don't know what they're doing, and so that's that's one of the very obvious things, and it's happening to a lot of kids, and some of them are finding out the hard way, but some of them do have good people in their corner that are helping them make smart decisions. So it's not all bad, and NIL has certainly helped and been a benefit for a lot of these players, but there's that flip side that I talked about. So it definitely is a juggling act, like you say, as far as trying to deciding, like, I want to take care of myself and be able to take care of the people around me, but I also need to make sure that my long-term future isn't impacted, and that I'm doing the things that will benefit me in the long term. So, yeah, and that's a very long-winded answer, but that's just kind of the reality of where we are, and it's going to be ugly before it gets better. But I think things will get better.
It's tough for these young kids, man. Like I don't envy their decisions at all. I mean, it's really hard to say no to the sums of money that are being thrown around in the NIL, like you say. I mean, it's not easy. And the unfortunate thing is that NIL has morphed into a pay for play type of situation, and that was never what NIL was supposed to be. But because of the NCAA not allowing NIL to become a thing sooner, by them ignoring it for so many years the way that they did, it forced these laws to be enacted by different states. Um, and it's ultimately resulted in basically the wild, wild west that we currently live in college football when it comes to NIL and the transfer portal as well. And it's really unfortunate for some of these kids. Some of these kids are being fed false narratives and bad advice, and they're being given a good amount of money. Let's face it, some decent money to go somewhere. But you talk about the development piece, and if you're looking for, if you're an NFL type guy that has a legitimate shot to have a career in the NFL, and you're chasing NIL bag after NIL bag, you're probably not going to be developed in the way, excuse me, that you need to be in order to have that career in the NFL. And that's going to be an interesting thing to kind of observe as, college football fans, for the next, decade or so. We'll see where college football ends up, and, kind of how it looks, in 5 years or what have you. But one of the big things I think that will be interesting to observe is does the does the development piece of college football, because everybody knows football is a developmental sport, um, and you have to get better year in and year out in order to achieve your goals. Like it's not like, oh, I'm a 5 star in high school, guaranteed going to be in the NFL. That doesn't always happen, right? You have to develop. You got to be around the right coaches. You got to be around the right system that showcases your ability. And I think there's a possibility, now this may not happen, but there's a possibility that this NIL environment that we've created in college football can somewhat tamper the development of players in college football. Now we'll see what that looks like long term. Maybe all this stuff works itself out, and I hope that it does. But it'll be interesting as a college football fan to observe it over the next 5 or 10 years, if you will, to see if the NIL has any negative effects on college football players developing into potential NFL talent. So I think that's an interesting piece that doesn't get talked about a ton. And it's like I said when I first started this reply. I don't envy these 17, 18, 19-year olds that are having to make these decisions,
No.
whether to take this money or go here or go there. I mean, that's tough, man. Um, you know, without some people in your ear that are close to you in your circle with a lot of wisdom, um, that's a tough environment to navigate for a lot of these guys, and you can't blame the decisions that they're making, really.
Yeah. Because you just got to realize that not all of them are going to make the right decision because they
Right.
are not their prefrontal cortex hasn't developed. They're just not. Most players are not just that mature and ready to make those types of decisions without help and guidance, proper help and guidance. So that's what makes all of this so difficult and so volatile and just so unpredictable, because you're not dealing with seasoned adults that have, and even seasoned adults don't get it right a lot of times. So imagine Magic. I mean, look at, yeah, you can look at anywhere from politics to I mean, so from a, when you're talking about a 16, 17, and obviously in college, you're talking about 18 to 22 year olds, like, we're not going to make the right decisions. Like I didn't make good decisions from 18 to 22. That never, the good decisions did not usually outweigh the bad ones.
100% did not.
So, and I'm obviously not a Division I football player. So,
right. Yeah.
It becomes it becomes a bigger thing when you are not just thinking about yourself, but you're also thinking about, other people, and there are a lot of people telling you and telling you what you should or shouldn't do. And, it's not, if you don't have the right people around you, that could be detrimental. So, that was a pretty long-winded response. I think that's a good place to close us out for tonight.
Yeah, absolutely, man. Shout out to every single person here in the chat. 34 people in the live chat. Tons of people have got in tonight. Come and left comments. Really do appreciate it. Shout out to all the super chats that we received tonight. IDK James came through in a huge way for the All In Show tonight. Will, our resident Notre Dame fan, came through with a super chat of his own. Really do appreciate everybody just kind of showing up. Every single time me and Jordan do a live, we have tons of people in here interacting with us, and it truly is special. We appreciate each and every one of you. We will be back here next Thursday at 8 p.m. with another edition of the All In Show. Hope you guys keep showing up. Hope you guys are commenting on the video, liking the video, sharing it in your various groups, whether that be Clemson groups or college football groups in general, on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, wherever you are sharing your content. Please share the show. Please bring more people in, so that we can continue the conversation about Clemson football and college football in general. Make sure you like the video before you get out of here. If you're not subscribed, go ahead and do that. Jordan, send the people off.
Just to echo everything TPC just said, yep, we really appreciate you guys for tuning in each and every week. And glad that you guys continue to support us, not just, monetarily, but just, watching our content, giving us likes. It really is humbling each and every week that, people get, are interested enough in what we have to say to show up. So greatly appreciate it. And we'll see you guys next week.
Yeah, absolutely. See you guys next week. 8 o'clock, All In Show next Thursday. We'll have a good show planned out for you guys. Forgot to mention, if you guys are watching this on the rewatch, really appreciate you. We will put the timestamps of each individual topic that we talked about in the description of the video about 10 to 15 minutes after the live ends. So until next time, I'm Tiger Paul Craven. He's Jordan Bowman. Go Tigers.
Later, y'all.